The sun was still struggling to fully break the horizon when the silence of the savannah began to behave strangely. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was something else. An overly prolonged pause, as if the environment itself were hesitating. The first birds appeared even before the light touched the ground. They didn't descend. They simply circled in wide arcs, keeping their distance. This wasn't typical behavior for fresh carrion. Something there was wrong. On the dry soil between tufts of low grass, there were marks, 2 tracks, a lion, a leopard, and between them, a distance that shouldn't exist, less than 2 meters. No signs of a struggle, no dragging, no blood, just the encounter. And then, the parting. As if 2 predators had faced each other and decided not to finish what nature always finishes. When the researcher arrived at the scene, he didn't write anything down for almost an entire minute. That never happened. He had measured thousands of tracks over decades. He knew how to recognize patterns before even thinking, but at that moment, something stalled, because that didn't fit. The lion's marks were deep, heavy, constant. There was no acceleration, no preparation for an attack. The leopards were light, precise, but there was no flight either. They had stood face to face, and no one ran, and no one attacked. In the savannah, that is not just rare, it is practically impossible. And what made it all even more disturbing was what had happened 3 days prior. Something that, at that moment, had not yet been fully understood, but which was beginning to shape a story that shouldn't exist, and that perhaps would never be fully explained. Three nights before that silent encounter, something had been taken. It wasn't a long struggle. There was no resistance. Death came swift and calculated. The cub disappeared during the early hours of the morning. A young male, still too small to defend himself, but large enough to already carry the scent of the future. When the pride noticed the absence, it was already too late. The mother scoured the entire territory, calling, stopping, listening, repeating, for hours. The logs captured that sound pattern, a specific type of vocalization that is not common. It isn't territorial. It isn't for hunting. It is searching, and there is something disturbing about it, because it means the animal is still waiting for a response. But the response no longer exists. At dawn, they found what remained. The body wasn't on the ground. It was suspended, caught between branches several meters high. That eliminated any doubt. In that region, only one predator does that, the leopard. And it wasn't a mistake. It was calculation, eliminating a potential rival before he grows up. In the logic of nature, this isn't cruelty. It is efficiency. But what came next wasn't efficient. The lion reached the spot. He stopped, and he stayed there. 40 minutes, without trying to climb, without roaring, without reacting, just watching. That, in itself, was already strange. But the true deviation began the following day, when he had a perfect opportunity to hunt and ignored it completely. Without hesitating, without looking back, he moved away from the pride, alone, and he walked toward a place he should have avoided. Dense vegetation, closed territory, leopard territory. And that is not the behavior of an experienced predator. It is the beginning of something outside the pattern. The wind that afternoon was blowing in the right direction, and that changed everything. The scent was in the air, fresh, unmistakable. The leopard was close, very close, but there was no rush. The lion didn't advance like an ordinary hunter. He didn't accelerate. He didn't adjust his route aggressively. He walked as if he already knew where he needed to go. The sensors indicated a gradual approach. 150 meters, 100, 80. And then he stopped. The leopard did too. Now they both knew. They were there, less than 50 meters apart, and neither of them moved. Time began to distort. Minutes felt far too long. The silence grew heavy, dense, as if any movement could shatter something greater than a simple pursuit. And then came the mistake. Or perhaps the decision. The leopard tried to reposition. 1 step. 2. It was enough. The lion surged forward. It wasn't a run. It was an explosion. The initial impact made the vegetation vibrate, but the leopard reacted perfectly. He climbed. In seconds, he gained height, a secure position. The advantage that always decides this type of confrontation. But what happened next did not follow the logic of either one. The lion stopped, exactly below, as before, as it was at the cub's location. Same position, same silence. But this time, the leopard was alive, watching, breathing heavily, body tense, waiting for the attack that never came. The lion did not roar. He did not try to climb. He did not encircle. He sat down and stayed. Minutes passed. Then dozens. The leopard tried to descend once. The lion simply stood up, without advancing, without a direct threat, but enough to stop him. Something there was being communicated, without sound, without clear movement, and that began to change the leopard's behavior. He stopped trying to flee. He stayed, watching back. Time passed, more than it should have, much more. And then, the unthinkable happened. The leopard descended, slowly, without haste, pausing at every movement, until he touched the ground, a few meters away. Now there was no advantage, no safe route. It was the moment when everything should have ended, but it didn't end. They stood face to face, 2 predators, 2 decisions, and no attack. The air felt too heavy for any action, and then the leopard turned and walked away, without running, without looking back, and the lion let him. After the leopard vanished into the vegetation, the lion remained, motionless, for a few more minutes, as if he were still there, even after everything had already ended. And then he stood up, turned, and walked away, in the opposite direction. No pursuit, no return, no attempt whatsoever to continue it. In the following days, everything returned to normal. Hunts, territorial movement, routine, as if nothing had happened. But it had happened. The data was there. The images, the tracks, all recorded. And yet, without sufficient explanation. Because within the logic of nature, that shouldn't happen. Predators do not forgive. They do not hesitate. They do not interrupt the inevitable. But there, something interrupted it. And no one could define what it was. Perhaps it was just a misinterpreted calculation. Perhaps a momentary assessment of risk. Or perhaps something we don't yet know how to name. Nature does not explain. It does not justify. It simply happens, and sometimes it leaves questions in place of answers. On that savannah, at some point between the loss and the encounter, two predators broke an invisible rule, and they moved on, as if nothing had happened. But it did, and the silence was the only thing that remained.